I bought the house because of the basement. That's what I keep telling myself now, though it sounds ridiculous when I say it out loud. I had always wanted a place with a basement I could turn into something of my own. The house was old but in good condition, quiet neighborhood, low price. The realtor had mentioned that the basement window was unusual, but insisted it was just a design quirk from the previous owner. I didn't think twice about it. The window was set low at the far corner of the basement wall. It was wider than most and perfectly clean, unlike the rest of the house, which smelled faintly of dust and age. When I first went down there, I expected to see the usual thing: dirt, foundation stone, maybe some old roots pressing through the cracks. But what I saw made no sense. The window didn't show soil or the side of the house. It showed water, deep blue moving water. At first, I assumed it was some kind of reflection. Maybe there was a mirrored surface or a glass illusion built by whoever lived here before. I even thought about calling the realtor to ask if it was a trick of light. But as I leaned closer, I realized it wasn't an illusion. The light shifted and rippled in a way no glass could fake. I could see movement, slow, deliberate currents like waves rolling in deep water. I remember crouching there, watching for a long time. The light had that strange, heavy blue tint that you only see when you're underwater. Occasionally, shadows passed by, faint shapes that made me think of large fish. I pressed my ear to the glass, expecting silence, but I heard something faint, a deep, distant sound, like something heavy dragging against stone. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe the glass backed into a water tank or an underground spring. It was an old house after all. When I told my neighbor about it the next day, she frowned and said the property had no plumbing under that side, that the land beneath was rock. I laughed it off, but that night when I went down again, the water outside the window was darker. It moved slower, and the dragging sound was louder. That was the first night I saw the light. It came from deep below, faint at first, then pulsing, like something glowing far beneath the surface. It wasn't steady. It pulsed like a heartbeat, slow and patient. The entire basement filled with that blue light, and for a few seconds, I couldn't look away. I felt something pulling at me. Not my body, but my thoughts, like the ocean itself was calling for me to come closer. When I blinked, the light was gone. The water outside was still again. I left the basement and locked the door behind me. But all night, even as I tried to sleep upstairs, I could still hear that sound from below, the slow drag against stone, coming from somewhere deep within the earth. The next morning, I noticed the window curtain in the living room had fallen overnight, though I hadn't opened any windows. The air smelled faintly of salt. My clothes, the walls, even my pillow had that faint dampness that clings to things near the sea. But I live hundreds of miles inland. That was when I realized the window wasn't showing me the ocean outside the house. It was showing me something else entirely. Something beneath it. Something that wanted to be seen. Part 1. The window below the ground. I bought the house because of the basement. That's what I keep telling myself now, though it sounds ridiculous when I say it out loud. I had always wanted a place with a basement I could turn into something of my own. The house was old but in good condition, quiet neighborhood, low price. The realtor had mentioned that the basement window was unusual, but insisted it was just a design quirk from the previous owner. I didn't think twice about it. The window was set low at the far corner of the basement wall. It was wider than most and perfectly clean, unlike the rest of the house, which smelled faintly of dust and age. When I first went down there, I expected to see the usual thing: dirt, foundation stone, maybe some old roots pressing through the cracks. But what I saw made no sense. The window didn't show soil or the side of the house. It showed water, deep blue, moving water. At first, I assumed it was some kind of reflection. Maybe there was a mirrored surface or a glass illusion built by whoever lived here before. I even thought about calling the realtor to ask if it was a trick of light. But as I leaned closer, I realized it wasn't an illusion. The light shifted and rippled in a way no glass could fake. I could see movement, slow, deliberate currents like waves rolling in deep water. I remember crouching there, watching for a long time. The light had that strange, heavy blue tint that you only see when you're underwater. Occasionally, shadows passed by, faint shapes that made me think of large fish. I pressed my ear to the glass, expecting silence, but I heard something faint. A deep, distant sound, like something heavy dragging against stone. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe the glass backed into a water tank or an underground spring. It was an old house after all. When I told my neighbor about it the next day, she frowned and said the property had no plumbing under that side, that the land beneath was rock. I laughed it off, but that night, when I went down again, the water outside the window was darker. It moved slower, and the dragging sound was louder. That was the first night I saw the light. It came from deep below, faint at first, then pulsing, like something glowing far beneath the surface. It wasn't steady. It pulsed like a heartbeat, slow and patient. The entire basement filled with that blue light, and for a few seconds, I couldn't look away. I felt something pulling at me. Not my body, but my thoughts, like the ocean itself was calling for me to come closer. When I blinked, the light was gone. The water outside was still again. I left the basement and locked the door behind me. But all night, even as I tried to sleep upstairs, I could still hear that sound from below, the slow drag against stone, coming from somewhere deep within the earth. The next morning, I noticed the window curtain in the living room had fallen overnight, though I hadn't opened any windows. The air smelled faintly of salt. My clothes, the walls, even my pillow had that faint dampness that clings to things near the sea. But I live hundreds of miles inland. That was when I realized the window wasn't showing me the ocean outside the house. It was showing me something else entirely. Something beneath it. Something that wanted to be seen. The smell became impossible to ignore. It wasn't overpowering at first, but steady, creeping, like the faint trace of sea mist that never left the air. Every morning, I woke to the same dampness on my sheets, the faint sting of salt on my skin. I started finding tiny grains of white crusting along the windowsills and in the corners of the house. At first, I thought it was dust, but when I touched it, it left a residue that burned slightly on my fingers. The basement had grown colder. Not just cool as basements are supposed to be, cold in a way that bit in a bone. When I walked down the stairs, the air felt heavy and thick, like being underwater. The window glowed faintly now, even during the day, as if light from the deep ocean was bleeding through. One night, I decided to test something. I brought a small stone and tapped it against the glass. It didn't make the sharp sound of glass. Instead, the sound was muffled, hollow, and distant, as if I were striking something submerged. Ripples spread across the surface outside the window, but they didn't fade quickly. They lingered, pulsing outward in perfect circles until they vanished into darkness. I should have stopped then, but curiosity is a strange kind of sickness. I crouched and whispered toward it, feeling stupid for doing so. The basement was silent for a moment, and then came a faint reply. Not words, more like a sound pressed through layers of water. A soft hum that rose and fell, long and low. It wasn't an echo. It wasn't from me. The sound vibrated through the air, through my chest, through my teeth. The light beyond the glass flickered, and I saw movement, shapes shifting far below. I couldn't make out details, only slow, deliberate motion. The water grew darker, almost black, except for that faint, glowing pulse from beneath. That night, as I lay awake upstairs, the hum followed me. I could hear it faintly through the floorboards. It came in slow waves like breathing. I pressed my ear to the wall and swore I could hear the faint drag again, that same scraping sound I'd heard the first time. Something heavy against stone, moving closer. A few days later, I noticed my reflection in the mirror looked different. My eyes seemed dimmer, the whites grayer, like I'd been underwater too long. My neighbor asked if I'd been to the coast recently because I smelled like seaweed and brine. I told her no, but she looked at me strangely after that, as if she didn't quite believe me. That evening, I went to the basement again, determined to understand. The air was colder than ever. My breath fogged as I approached the window. The water beyond was still, but I could see something new now, a shape closer than before. I leaned forward, heart hammering, and realized with a sick twist that it wasn't in the water, it was pressed against the inside of the glass. It looked like a hand, pale, long-fingered, pressing outward. For a moment, it stayed perfectly still, as if frozen in time. Then, slowly, the fingers moved, dragging across the glass from inside, leaving trails of frost or salt, I couldn't tell which. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over the stairs. The hand withdrew, vanishing into the black beyond the window. But as I ran up the steps, I could hear the faint sound following me, a soft tapping on the other side of the glass, steady and deliberate, like someone knocking in slow rhythm. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that faint hum again. But now it wasn't coming from below. It was behind my walls. And when I listened closely enough, I realized it wasn't just a sound anymore. It was trying to form words. I started hearing the voice clearly around the third week. It was no longer a hum, no longer muffled by the thick water between us. It spoke softly, slowly, like a current curling through my head. I never heard it directly with my ears. It vibrated behind them, somewhere deeper, like a thought that wasn't mine. It didn't use words at first, just tones that seemed to carry meaning I couldn't explain, but eventually it began shaping them, clumsy and broken, like something trying to imitate speech. It called my name. The first time it said it, I dropped the glass I was holding. The sound came from below, from the direction of the basement. I stood frozen in the kitchen as the air around me turned still. Then I heard again, the voice stretched and distant, like it was passing through miles of water before reaching me. It said my name once more, softer this time, and then added come down. I didn't move for nearly an hour. When I finally gathered the courage to check the basement, I opened the door and felt a burst of cold, damp air brush past me. It smelled like salt and something metallic underneath. The steps creaked under my feet as I descended, each one colder than the last. When I reached the bottom, the window was glowing again, brighter this time, filling the basement with that eerie blue light that didn't seem to come from any real source. The water on the other side was no longer still. It swirled slowly, almost deliberately, and through it, I could see something moving closer, something enormous. Not fish, not human, but something with limbs too long, too slow. I couldn't see its shape fully, only pieces of it as it passed through patches of light. I stood there, unable to breathe, until it stopped right in front of the window. And then I saw a face. It was faint, blurred by the water, but human enough to make me feel sick. Its features were soft, almost unfinished, as if the ocean itself was trying to remember what a face should look like. Its eyes were too large and too pale, glowing faintly in the dark. Its mouth didn't move, but I heard it again in my head. Come down, I stumbled back, gripping the railing of the stairs. The face tilted, as though it was studying me through the glass. Then, slowly, it lifted one long hand and pressed it against the window again. The pane shuddered. Fine cracks webbed out from where its palm touched. Water didn't pour through, it just trembled, as though the barrier between us was weaker now. I ran upstairs and slammed the basement door shut, locking it even though I knew it wouldn't matter. The voice kept whispering long after I left the basement. It followed me through the night, curling through the walls, soft and rhythmic like waves lapping against the shore. I couldn't sleep. Every shadow in the room looked darker. The faint blue glow from below the floorboards pulsed once every few seconds, like a heartbeat echoing from under the house. I thought about leaving, packing up, and driving away, but I couldn't bring myself to. Something about the voice had changed. It wasn't only calling me now, it was showing me things. Dreams of a vast ocean stretching beneath the house, deep and endless, full of shapes that moved slowly through the dark. I would wake up drenched in cold sweat, my sheets damp and smelling of brine. One morning, I looked out the kitchen window and saw the street covered in a fine layer of salt. My neighbor's cat was sitting on the curb staring at my house. Unmoving, its fur stiff and wet as if it had just come from the rain. But the sky was clear, not a cloud in sight. When I stepped outside, the cat hissed, its back arched, its eyes reflecting the same faint blue light that came from the basement window. Then it turned and ran. That night, the cracks in the basement glass grew wider. I heard the sound of water against the foundation, heavy and constant, as if a tide had risen around the house. The voice was no longer calm. It was insistent, desperate, repeating the same two words over and over until they filled my head like a chant. Come down, come down, come down, and beneath those words, beneath the steady pulse of the sea, I heard something else, something that sounded almost like laughter. But it wasn't the sound of joy or amusement. It was the sound of something patient, something waiting and knowing I would eventually come. The morning after the voice began chanting, I found water seeping up through the floorboards. It wasn't much at first, just thin, glistening lines between the wood planks, but when I touched it, it was ice cold and smelled like the ocean. It wasn't fresh water. It was thick and faintly greasy, like something that had traveled far from any clean shore. I mopped it up, but it kept returning, always pooling in the same place, directly above the basement. I told myself it was a burst pipe, maybe something leaking from the old plumbing. But when I went outside, there were no signs of damage, no sound of running water. The grass near the foundation was dry, untouched. Only inside the house was the air damp and heavy, like it had been raining for weeks. That night, I couldn't ignore it anymore. The house pulsed. The floorboards creaked in slow, rhythmic intervals, almost like the house itself was breathing. I pressed my ear to the floor and heard the unmistakable sound of waves breaking against something solid. I froze there for a long time, listening to the impossible tide just inches beneath me. Finally, I went down to the basement again. The window was gone. Not shattered, not broken, simply gone. In its place was a wide, black void that stretched endlessly downward. I couldn't see where it led. A faint mist hung near the opening, drifting lazily, and the smell of salt burned my throat. I could hear the water moving far below, and the same voice echoing faintly from the depths. It said something different this time. It said I was already below. I backed away, tripping over the steps as I scrambled up. But when I reached the top, the door wouldn't open. My hand slipped against the handle, slick with moisture that shouldn't have been there. When I finally forced it open, the lights upstairs were dim, flickering. I could hear the waves clearly now, echoing through the walls. Every window in the house was fog from the inside. I ran to one and wiped the condensation away with my sleeve. What I saw outside didn't make sense. The street was gone. The neighboring houses were gone. Beyond my front yard, there was nothing but open sea, black and endless. I staggered back from the window and felt my knees hit the floor. The sound of water was deafening now. The whole house shuddered as if floating. When I dared to look again, I saw something moving out there, a massive shape drifting just beneath the surface, circling slowly around the house. Each time it passed, the walls groaned, and I could feel pressure building in the air, like being deep underwater. Then I saw them. Faces, pressed against the glass from the outside, pale and distorted, eyes open and staring in different directions. Dozens of them, floating upward, hair drifting in the unseen current. I stumbled back and felt water splash around my feet. The floor was covered. It had risen without me noticing, ankle deep now, swirling slowly. I could see movement in it, small, dark shapes darting through the shallow water. They brushed against my legs like fish. I backed up toward the stairs, but the moment I turned, I heard the creak of the basement door opening by itself. The voice came again, louder now, but not through my ears, inside me. It said it had been waiting for me. I ran to my bedroom and slammed the door, pressing my weight against it. The water was rising faster, seeping under the door. My reflection in the mirror across the room was wrong. The me in the glass wasn't moving the same way. It was smiling, slow and deliberate. I watched as it turned its head toward the door while I was still staring at it. The house groaned like a ship in a storm. The walls were sweating brine, salt crystallizing in the corners of the ceiling. I pressed my hands to my ears, but the sound of the tide filled my head. It was calling, insistent and endless. When I looked at the mirror again, I realized it wasn't a mirror anymore. It was a window, faint, shimmering, with dark water moving beyond it. My reflection was gone. In its place, the same pale figure from the basement drifted closer, its eyes fixed on me. Behind it, the faint outline of something massive moved through the depths. It pressed its hand against the glass again, and this time, the mirror bulged inward like a thin membrane of water. Droplets began to spill down the wall, thick and slow. I backed away, but there was nowhere left to go. The voice whispered one final time, so close it felt like it was breathing against my neck. "You're already below." Then the mirror burst inward, and the room filled with the sound of rushing water. The lights went out, and I remember the sensation of being pulled, dragged downward by invisible hands. The last thing I saw before everything went black was my own reflection, smiling, serene, sinking into the dark ocean beyond the glass. I woke up on the basement floor with salt on my lips and water pooling around me, though I had no memory of opening the door again. The light above was dim blue, as if coming through deep water instead of air. The window at the far end of the room had returned, but it wasn't a window anymore. It was wide open like a wound in the wall, and through it, I saw not the ocean, but what looked like the bottom of it. There were things floating upside down above me, as though gravity had turned on its head. Seaweed swayed slowly in a current that didn't reach me, and pale figures drifted past the glass, their limbs slow and lifeless. Every movement made the boards beneath me moan. I tried to climb the stairs, but the wood had softened under my weight, soaked through. Every step sank a little. The door at the top was swollen shut, and I hammered at it until my palms stung. When I stopped, I realized the sound I thought was my heartbeat was something knocking back from the other side of the door in perfect rhythm. I pressed my ear to it and heard my own voice whispering my name from above the stairs. It said to open the door. When I did, the air that rushed out wasn't air. It was cold and wet and heavy like being pulled under a wave. The entire house was filled knee-deep with salt water, and every piece of furniture floated as if it had been drifting for years. My photographs on the walls were ruined, yet they weren't blank. The people in them were moving. I could see my mother waving in a photo from my childhood, only now she was turning toward me with her face blurred by water. I tore the frame down, and the photo slithered out of the glass, sticking wetly to my hand. The ink bled across my palm, forming words I didn't want to read. You brought it back. The sound of the ocean came from everywhere at once. The ceiling bulged downward like something pressing from above. I waded toward the living room and found the front door hanging open to nothing but black water. The horizon was gone. The entire world outside had turned to ocean. I should have felt wind or spray, but it was silent and still. The surface was perfectly calm except for the faint ripples leading away from the house, like something enormous had just submerged. Then I saw my own reflection again, not in a mirror, but in the surface of the water outside. It was standing at the edge, looking back at me. I was certain I hadn't moved. The reflection smiled and raised its hand slowly until its finger pointed directly behind me. I turned. The basement door had swung open and the stairs were gone. There was only a downward tunnel filled with shifting blue light. I don't remember choosing to go down, but I found myself walking into it barefoot, the sound of dripping echoing endlessly ahead. The deeper I went, the louder the sea became until I could feel it pounding against my ribs. The tunnel walls pulsed as if alive, wet with something thicker than water. When I reached the end, I was standing inside the ocean itself. The basement had dissolved. There was no surface, no direction. Only the faint outline of the house floating around me like a ghostly structure of glass and bone. And then I saw it, the thing that had been circling all along. It wasn't a creature or a shape I could understand. It was the absence of shape, the place where light refused to go. It moved closer with slow, deliberate grace, and when it stopped, I saw my face emerge from it, smiling wide and wrong. My reflection whispered without sound, and I understood. It wasn't trying to take me. It already had. The realization came like a wave breaking through my skull. The house, the street, my life above were nothing but the surface of the water. I had drowned the first night. I touched that window, and everything since then had been what happens after. The voices, the water, the endless sea outside the house were not hallucinations. They were home. I don't know how long I've been here now. Time drifts in circles like the tides. Sometimes I hear people moving above the surface, faint and distant. Sometimes I see new faces at the glass, peering down into the dark, trying to understand why their basement smells like the sea. They never stay long before they leave and forget what they saw. But sometimes one of them comes closer and presses a hand to the window, and that's when I move toward them. If you ever find a basement window that shows the ocean, don't look too long. Don't touch the glass, because the reflection staring back might not be yours, and once you see the light move beneath it, the tide already knows your name.